He tore the check right in front of her. The sound wasn't loud, but it hit like thunder. In that quiet room, he had no idea he'd just torn up his own future. It had started like any other morning. The air inside Crescent City Savings smelled of coffee and printer ink. Behind the counter, manager Thomas Reed straightened his tie, checked his reflection in the glass door, and told himself, as always, that he could spot trouble the moment it walked in. That was when Amira Johnson stepped up to his desk. A quiet, 16-year-old with bright eyes and a scholarship check that could change her future. She smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. I need to deposit this for my college tuition." Thomas looked at the check, $38,000, and then at her. His expression tightened. "And where exactly did you get this?" Amira blinked, confused. "It's from the Bright Horizons Foundation, for my first semester at Lakeside University." He leaned back, a cold smirk curling on his lips. "Young lady, this looks fake. You expect me to believe a teenager from—" He glanced at the address on the form, pausing just long enough to make his point. "That neighborhood has a scholarship check this big?" The room went quiet. Even the clicking keyboards seemed to hold their breath. "I'm not lying," Amira said softly. "You can call the foundation," Thomas chuckled. "Or I can save us all the trouble." He tore the check in half, then again, and again. Each rip sounded sharper than the last. A piece of paper fluttered to the ground between them. Amira's fingers trembled, but her voice didn't. "My mother said people might try to make me feel small one day. She told me to stand tall anyway." "Your mother should teach you not to waste grown folks' time," Thomas sneered. Her jaw tightened. "She's a teacher, and she taught me just fine." "Security," Thomas called without looking at her. "Please escort this young lady out." A guard stepped forward, uncertain. Amira took a breath, nodded once, and walked out with quiet dignity, leaving the scraps of her dreams scattered across the desk. Outside, the sky was pale blue, the kind that looks calm right before a storm. Amira sat on a bench, staring at the message on her phone. "Mom, something happened, and I think you were right." On the other end of the city, Naomi Johnson, a woman known in corporate boardrooms as the CEO of NovaPath Technologies, froze mid-meeting. Her assistant saw her expression change and whispered, "Everything okay, ma'am?" Naomi's reply was measured. "No, but it will be." Back at the bank, Thomas was laughing in the break room. She had the nerve to say it was for college. Can you believe that? One of his co-workers forced a laugh. Another, Lena, the young teller who had watched the scene, kept her eyes on her coffee. "Maybe it was real," she said quietly. She didn't look like she was lying. Thomas waved her off. "Lena, you've got to learn to trust your instincts. I've been in this business 25 years. I can spot a fraud from a mile away." He had no idea those words were being recorded, not just by the security cameras above him, but by Lena's conscience. By the time Amira reached home, dusk had turned the sky to gold. The Johnson house stood at the edge of a quiet suburb, small, elegant, and filled with quiet strength. Inside, Naomi was already waiting at the kitchen island, her tablet glowing with an open news report about the bank. "Tell me everything," she said. Amira hesitated. He said the check was fake. Then he ripped it up. Naomi's pen stopped midair. Her calm was practiced, but her eyes turned to steel. And did he know who he was talking to? "No, and I didn't tell him." A pause hung between them. Naomi exhaled, slow and steady. "Good, some lessons teach themselves." Amira frowned. "Mom, please don't make it worse." Naomi smiled faintly, a smile that never reached her eyes. "Sweetheart, I don't make things worse. I make things right." That night, while most of Crescent City slept, 2 lights glowed in the Johnson home. In the upstairs study, Naomi was on a call with her legal team. "I want the bank's executive board on a video conference tomorrow morning. They'll want to see the footage before I release it to the press." And in her bedroom, Amira sat by the window, typing a message to the Bright Horizons Foundation. "There's been an issue at the bank. Could you please issue a replacement check? And this time send it directly to the bank's regional director?" When she hit send, she glanced at the torn envelope on her desk and whispered, "Let's see how brave he feels tomorrow." Outside, the streetlights hummed. The world was still, unaware that one man's arrogance had just awakened a storm that would shake an entire city. By sunrise, Crescent City stirred awake, unaware that somewhere above its skyline, quiet thunder was already forming. At the 23rd floor of the Novapath Tower, Naomi Johnson stood before a wall of windows, her reflection framed by dawn's pale light. She wasn't just Amira's mother today. She was a strategist, a storm in heels. Her phone buzzed. "Mrs. Johnson," said a crisp voice on the line. "We've secured a meeting with Crescent City Savings executive team at 10 a.m. They're expecting a business consultation." Naomi smiled faintly. "Perfect. Let's make sure they never forget it." She turned to her assistant. "Send the bank's CEO a message. Tell her this isn't about revenge. It's about accountability." At 9:57 a.m., Thomas Reed was still laughing in his office, sipping coffee and retelling yesterday's story to another manager. "You should have seen her face. I almost felt bad," he said with a chuckle. "Almost," his phone buzzed. "Mr. Reed," said the receptionist's nervous voice, "the CEO wants to see you right away. There's a meeting in the boardroom." He grinned, straightening his tie. Finally, someone noticed. As he walked toward the glass conference room, he rehearsed his version of events. "I was protecting the bank's interests. Standard procedure. Easy. He'd handled complaints before, but when the doors slid open, his words vanished. At the head of the long table sat Elena Morales, the bank's CEO, and beside her, Naomi Johnson, dressed in a charcoal blazer, composed and unreadable. At the far end of the table, Amira sat quietly, her schoolbooks stacked in front of her. Thomas froze mid-step. Elena gestured to the empty chair. "Mr. Reed, sit." He obeyed, his pulse quickening. Naomi's voice was calm, steady as glass. "Mr. Reed, you destroyed a scholarship check yesterday. Do you recall?" Thomas swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am. I believed it was forged." "You have to understand, people," Naomi interrupted softly. "People like who, Mr. Reed?" He blinked. I mean suspicious individuals. It's standard protocol to—" "Protocol?" Naomi said, folding her hands. "Does protocol include insulting minors? Accusing them without proof? Calling security on a student whose only crime was earning a scholarship?" Elena's gaze sharpened. "We reviewed the footage." Thomas's stomach dropped. "Footage?" Naomi nodded toward the monitor on the wall. "Every branch has audio now, doesn't it?" The screen flickered, and there he was. His voice filled the room. "You expect me to believe a girl from that neighborhood got a check this big? Rip!" The sound was deafening in the silence that followed. Thomas's face drained of color. I didn't know the cameras recorded audio." Elena's voice was low. "They do. Installed by one of our partners." She turned toward Naomi. "Novapath Technologies, correct?" Naomi smiled slightly. "That's right." Thomas's eyes widened. The CEO of Novapath, one of the bank's largest technology suppliers in back, was sitting right across from him. Naomi rose slowly. "You spoke about my daughter's neighborhood. You called her a fraud. You mocked her mother, me, without knowing who I was. Tell me, Mr. Reed, do you still think your instincts were right?" He tried to speak, but his throat felt dry as sand. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean—" "Didn't mean what?" Naomi's tone stayed calm, but her words cut clean. "Didn't mean to expose the prejudice you hide behind professionalism." Amira finally spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Mr. Reed, you told me I didn't look like someone who belongs in college. You were right about one thing." He looked up, startled. "I don't belong in your world," she said. I'm building my own. Silence filled the room. Then Naomi turned to Elena. I didn't come here to destroy your institution. I came to offer a chance to rebuild it. Elena nodded carefully. Go on. I'm not filing a lawsuit, Naomi said. Yet, but I do have conditions. She placed a folder on the table. 1. Mr. Reed is terminated immediately for misconduct and bias. Thomas opened his mouth, but Elena raised her hand. Quiet agreement. 2. The bank will sponsor an annual internship for underrepresented students, fully funded for 5 years. Elena flipped through the proposal inside. And the third? Naomi's tone softened. A public apology. Not to me, to my daughter. And to every young person who's ever been told they don't belong. Elena looked up. You're giving us a way to make this right, Naomi smiled. I'm giving you a way to learn. When the meeting ended, Thomas signed his termination papers in silence. As he packed his things, he caught sight of Amira by the window, sunlight touching her face. He wanted to say sorry, but the words stuck somewhere between guilt and pride. Naomi's voice came from the doorway. Mr. Reed, my daughter doesn't need your apology. But you might need her forgiveness one day. Then she turned and left, the quiet hum of her heels fading into the hall. That afternoon, the story spread like wildfire. From offices to social media feeds. Bank manager fired after destroying student's scholarship check. But for Naomi and Amira, it wasn't about headlines. It was about justice. Quiet, precise, and powerful. Because sometimes the loudest revenge is simply doing what's right. The story broke by noon. Local news anchors said it first, then social media turned it into a wildfire. Teen's scholarship check torn apart. CEO mother responds with grace and power. By sunset, the entire city was talking about it. At home, Amira scrolled through her phone, stunned by the comments flooding in. Proud of this young woman's composure. Justice served with style. Naomi Johnson teaching the whole country what accountability looks like. Amira set the phone down. Mom, this is getting big. Naomi looked up from her laptop. Her tone stayed even. Good, maybe it should. But people are saying awful things about him, Amira whispered. I didn't want to ruin his life. Naomi closed the laptop and gave her daughter a steady look. You didn't ruin his life, sweetheart. He did that himself. We just refused to stay silent about it. At the same time, on the other side of town, Lena, the teller who had witnessed everything, walked out of the bank into the cool evening air. Reporters swarmed the sidewalk, their cameras flashing like starlight. Miss, were you there when it happened? She hesitated, then spoke clearly. Yes, I saw it all. The girl stayed calm the whole time. She deserved better. That single quote aired on every channel by morning. And it changed everything. Inside the bank's headquarters, meetings went on for hours. Executives shuffled papers, publicists drafted statements, and lawyers whispered about damage control. At the head of the table, CEO Elena Morales rubbed her temples. We can't hide this, she said finally. We own it, and we fix it. A junior board member looked nervous. You mean the partnership with Nova Path? Elena nodded. Exactly. Naomi's proposal wasn't a threat. It was a lifeline. We'll implement every word of it. The next week, cameras rolled as Elena stood on a small stage in the bank's downtown branch. To her left stood Naomi. To her right, Amira. Today, Elena announced, we are launching the New Horizons initiative, a scholarship fund for students from underrepresented communities, and a mandatory empathy and equity program for all employees. The crowd applauded, and flashes lit up the room. Naomi stepped up to the microphone. Her voice was warm but firm. This isn't about punishment. It's about growth. My daughter reminded me, and all of us, that dignity has to live in our institutions, not just our intentions. Amira didn't speak at first. She simply looked out at the rows of cameras, the employees, the curious faces. Then she said softly, "I don't want anyone to be afraid to walk into a bank, or a school, or any place where they belong. I just want people to look at each other and see potential instead of limits." Her words, simple and clear, drew a standing ovation. That night, her quote became the headline. See potential, not limits. For Thomas Reed, the world had grown very small. He stayed home, curtains drawn, watching the same broadcast in silence. His coffee had gone cold hours ago. When his phone buzzed, it wasn't a friend. It was a job rejection. Another one. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the dull ache of regret pressing against his ribs. The truth hit him in waves. He hadn't just lost his job, he'd lost his reflection. His wife's voice broke the silence. "Tom, you could apologize. Publicly," he rubbed his face. "Would it even matter? Maybe not to them," she said softly. "But maybe to you." He didn't answer. But later that night he opened his laptop, and he began to type. The next morning, Naomi was on her way to a speaking event when her phone buzzed. It was an email. Subject, an apology, from Thomas Reed. She hesitated, then opened it. "Mrs. Johnson, I've watched the footage more times than I can count. Each time I see myself, and I don't like the man I see. I can't undo what I did, but I can learn from it. Thank you for giving me a lesson I didn't deserve, but needed." Naomi closed her eyes, exhaled slowly, and replied simply, "Then make the lesson matter." She hit send. Weeks passed. The scholarship program filled faster than anyone expected. Local colleges partnered with the initiative. Banks in other cities began reaching out, asking to adopt the same training. One small moment of arrogance had sparked a nationwide conversation. And for Amira, life moved on, but with new purpose. She studied harder, volunteered at mentorship events, and started a blog for students navigating financial aid. Her first post began with the words, "Sometimes the door to your dream closes in your face, not because you don't deserve it, but because someone else forgot how to see your worth. Don't wait for them to open it again. Build your own door." It went viral within a day. That night, Naomi stood in the doorway of Amira's room, watching her type under the soft glow of her desk lamp. "You've changed more than one life, you know," Naomi said quietly. Amira smiled without looking up. "You too, Mom," Naomi chuckled. "Guess we make a good team." "Always," Amira said, hitting publish. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant applause. Proof that one act of courage, born from injustice, can ripple far enough to change the world. 5 years passed like pages fluttering in the wind. The world moved on. But some stories never truly ended. Amira Johnson was now 21. Her hair was longer, her stride more certain, her name whispered in classrooms and conference halls alike. The New Horizons initiative had changed lives. Over 200 scholarships granted, countless internships created. She'd grown from being the girl with the torn check into the woman who built bridges. And today, she was back in Crescent City to speak at a community business forum. The banner outside the hall read, "Building Trust Through Change." She smiled to herself. Full circle, she thought. Inside, people gathered in neat rows, the air buzzing with conversation and camera flashes. Naomi sat near the front, proud but quiet. She preferred to let her daughter's words do the shining now. When Amira took the stage, her voice was calm, her eyes bright with memory. 5 years ago, I walked into a bank just to deposit a check. I walked out with a lesson that changed my life. That power without empathy is just noise. The audience leaned in. I learned that the only way to fix broken systems is to lead with grace, not vengeance. My mother showed me that. Naomi's eyes softened as Amira looked her way. But here's the truth, Amira continued. The moment that broke me also built me. Because when someone tears up your future, you learn how to write a better one. Applause filled the hall. Afterward, Amira stayed behind to greet guests. One by one, people came up. Young students, business leaders, teachers, each thanking her for her voice. And then, quietly, a man approached from the back. Older, slightly stooped, a face she hadn't seen since that awful day. Thomas Reed. He looked smaller now, not just in stature, but in spirit. His hands trembled slightly as he held out a thin envelope. "Miss Johnson," he said softly. "Or, I suppose I should say, Doctor-to-be." Amira turned slowly, studying him. For a heartbeat, the years vanished, and she was 16 again, standing in that cold bank lobby. But this time, she wasn't the one trembling. "Mr. Reed," she said, her tone gentle but firm. "It's been a long time," he nodded. "Too long. I came to listen, not to interrupt, but I wanted to thank you. You probably don't remember my letter." "I remember," she said. "Every word." He hesitated, then handed her the envelope. Inside was a folded program, a local charity's brochure. At the top, in simple print, the Reed Foundation for Opportunity. Annual scholarships for first-generation students. Amira looked up. "You started this?" He nodded, eyes damp. "I had to do something. After that day, I couldn't live with the man I was. So I took what I had left and tried to turn it into something good." Amira's lips curved in a small, thoughtful smile. "That's commendable." He let out a shaky laugh. "You have every reason to hate me. But you didn't. You and your mother, you gave me the one thing I didn't deserve, the chance to learn." Amira paused. "You made the most of it, Mr. Reed. That's what matters." He met her eyes. "I'll never stop trying to make it right." She reached out and shook his hand. Firm, steady, forgiving. "Then maybe you already have," she said quietly. Naomi, watching from across the room, felt something loosen in her chest. The kind of peace that doesn't come from victory, but from closure. When Amira rejoined her, Naomi smiled. "You handled that beautifully." Amira shrugged, a little smile playing on her lips. "You taught me well. Justice doesn't need an audience, just courage." Naomi chuckled softly. "You're wiser than I was at your age." "Maybe," Amira teased. "But you were louder." They both laughed. That evening, Amira stood by her hotel window, gazing out over the city lights, the same skyline that once witnessed her humiliation, now glowing with quiet pride. Her reflection smiled back at her, stronger, calmer, and full of purpose. The world wasn't perfect. It probably never would be, but she had learned something vital. When you face injustice, your response can echo far beyond your own story. She thought of the hundreds of students studying on scholarships, of her mother's speeches inspiring boardrooms, of Thomas Reed running a small foundation in a borrowed office. All of it, every ripple, started with a torn piece of paper. As the city lights flickered below, Amira whispered the words that had become her mantra. "Sometimes, the storm that tried to drown you becomes the wind that lifts your wings." She turned off the lamp, the skyline glowing like a promise on the horizon. Tomorrow, there would be new battles, new lessons, and new doors to open. But tonight, peace finally had a name, and it was hers. Time has a way of turning moments into movements, and what began as one torn check had become a living symbol of courage, compassion, and change. 7 years later, the New Horizons Foundation had expanded far beyond Crescent City. Branches now stood in 6 states, partnering with banks, tech firms, and schools. Thousands of students, many the first in their families to attend college, wore its logo proudly on backpacks and resumes. The name Amira Johnson had become synonymous with integrity. At 23, she had graduated at the top of her class and was now a policy consultant, shaping programs that brought equity into the financial world that once turned her away. And on this day, the city was honoring her and her mother with the Civic Impact Award. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light. Journalists lined the walls, cameras humming quietly. Naomi, elegant as ever, adjusted the microphone. "When my daughter was 16, she began, her voice steady but warm. She learned that sometimes dignity costs more than money, but she also learned that grace, the kind that stands tall without shouting, can rebuild what arrogance destroys." The audience fell silent. Naomi turned toward her daughter. "Amira, this is your story, but it belongs to everyone who refuses to be silent when they're told they don't belong." Amira stepped forward. She looked calm, but her heart was full. Of memories, faces, and the weight of how far they'd come. "I once thought justice was about revenge," she said softly. "It's not. It's about responsibility. About making sure the next person doesn't face the same pain." A ripple of applause. She smiled faintly. "Years ago, a man tore up a check I'd earned. But he didn't tear up my belief in myself. He couldn't." She paused, meeting Naomi's gaze. "Because my mother taught me that worth isn't printed on paper. It's written in how you rise." The crowd stood, clapping, not just for the story, but for what it had inspired. After the ceremony, Amira slipped away to the balcony. The city lights stretched before her like a sea of stars. Naomi joined her, champagne in hand. "You did good, kid," she said softly. Amira laughed. "You too. Guess we really did turn one bad day into a lifetime project." Naomi smiled. "You know, I thought success would feel different. But watching you up there, it feels right." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below like distant applause. Down the street, in a modest office with second-hand furniture and a glowing blue sign that read, "Reed Foundation for Opportunity," Thomas Reed finished a long day of mentoring students. The walls were lined with photos. Smiling graduates, scholarship winners, interns. Each one a small redemption, a quiet apology written in deeds. He turned off the lights and locked the door, a tired but peaceful look on his face. For the first time in years, he didn't see the man from that video. He saw someone still trying, still learning, and that was enough. 2 months later, Amira received a handwritten letter in the mail. "Dear Miss Johnson, one of our students, a girl named Talia, received a scholarship through your foundation last year. She told me she wants to major in education so she can help kids who grew up like she did. When I asked what inspired her, she said, 'That story about the girl whose check got torn up, but she kept going. I thought you should know. Your courage didn't stop with you. With respect.'" Thomas Reed Amira smiled as she folded the letter. "Maybe people really can change," she murmured. Naomi, reading over her shoulder, nodded. "That's why we fight. Not to win, but to transform." Later that evening, Amira walked along the same street where the old bank once stood. It had been remodeled, renamed, and rebranded, the New Horizons emblem shining proudly above the doors. Through the glass, she could see young interns at their desks, laughing, learning, working. She whispered to herself, "This is what healing looks like." The wind carried the sounds of the city. Buses, laughter, music spilling from cafes. Life, as it always did, moved forward. But this time, it moved with a little more light. Amira tilted her face toward the night sky, thinking of all the students who would never know her story but would feel its impact every time a door opened easily for them. Her mother's words echoed softly in her mind. The truth always finds a way. Epilogue, years later, when people told the story of the torn check, they didn't focus on the humiliation. They talked about the ripple that followed, how one act of bias had accidentally built a bridge of opportunity. They quoted Amira's words in classrooms and leadership seminars. Justice isn't revenge. It's responsibility. They showed her photo, smiling beneath the New Horizons banner, beside her mother, the visionary who turned pain into purpose, and in small offices across the country, young men and women filled out scholarship forms. Their futures brighter because someone once refused to accept the word impossible. That's how the story ended. Not with anger, but with impact. Not with bitterness, but with balance. And maybe, somewhere, that's the truest form of justice there is.